I'm Tobias Revel.
And I'm Radha Mystery.
And this is Futur-ish, a podcast about how nothing is new and everything has happened before.
We've been working and playing in futures for over a decade of hype and bluster amidst increasing uncertainty and complexity.
In each episode, we explore a recent event or signal for its historical context and speculate on future possibilities.
And make it make sense for people like you and me.
We got a shout out in our work meeting.
It was very awkward. I didn't really know what to say.
It was, honestly. I was like, I don't want separation of church and state, you know?
Yeah. I don't want people knowing that I've got a life outside of work. That makes me
I don't want people
uncomfortable.
knowing that I'm friends with you. That's my thing.
Yeah.
You know, not good for my cred, man.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
I've got loads of water on me, and I'm wondering if Evie took a piss while she was somewhere.
No.
It smells neutral.
I'm dying.
I wouldn't put it past her just to take a quick piss and then go away.
And I am actually crying, bro. Speaking of children and decreasing fertility rates, I was looking for something that was a little bit whimsical, and I'm sorry to say I've probably failed. It involves people dying and also being born, and hashtag Causey lives. Did I use that right?
You did use that right. Almost a Londoner. You came across very well.
Although I pronounced my R's a little bit too hard, I think, for a Londoner.
You basically want to get rid of those.
I know. I can't do it, though. We're going to go down a little bit of a journey. So it's another one of those buckle up bubbas. It ends in something that feels a little bit handsmaid tale-y, and I really did not intend for it to go there. So in November of 2025, a couple of months ago, the Santa Fe City Council voted on raising its minimum wage from $15 an hour to $17.50 by the year 2027. Now, that's not necessarily the novel part. What is unique is that this is the first city in the United States to account for the cost of housing when calculating minimum wage. So typically when we make these jumps in minimum wage, we're only referencing the consumer price index. We're looking at things like how much does it cost to buy groceries and things like that. This is apparently the first time where there's an explicit link to housing costs and the minimum wage. Do you have something like that in the UK at all?
We definitely have minimum wage. We also have a thing called a living wage, which is sort of above the minimum wage.
Okay, so this got me thinking about the state of housing currently, because I live in Los Angeles. Housing prices are insane over here, and it is getting even more and more ridiculous, and people continue to say we're approaching this bursting of this bubble. But what I also wanted to know was what other data points are impacted by housing costs. And there was a comment in one of the articles that I was reading as part of this new policy that had been passed in Santa Fe. And they said, can the world adjust down the number of people gradually to about 1 billion? That will increase wages and quality of life, maybe. Given that we will probably be hitting 9.5 billion people by 2070, projected by the UN, that's not looking likely anytime soon. But I was interested in this idea that we are in this fertility rate crisis. Birth rates are going down all over the world, and to the point that Taiwan's fertility rate hit 0.89 children per woman last year. Kindergartens and elementary schools are having to close their doors. South Korea, 0.74 births per woman, the lowest on the planet for the last 20 years. And the population is projected to shrink by a third by 2072.
And I was going to say, just for context, because I do happen to have that stat on the top of my head, the birth replacement rate. So in other words, in order for a population to be sustained, not to grow, is 2.1 children per mother.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great for a number of reasons. But I think some of the solutions are equally not great, and we'll get into that a little bit. The average American woman between ages 15 and 44 gave birth to less than 2 children. And the U.S. fertility rate, the number of children born to women of childbearing age, reached a record low in 2024. So that has continued into 2025 and 2026. So a little bit of a problem. And, well, guess who has an opinion on this?
Noted acquirer and opinion maker, Elon Musk. Again, doesn't invent anything, just acquires things.
So
Massive
he says,
misnomer. Acquires children, acquires bad press, acquires rocket companies.
yes, Elon Musk, the one who must have all of the opinions, has decided that low birth rates are the, quote, biggest danger civilization faces by far, end quote. And this was tweeted in 2022. And tweets are incredibly reputable sources of information. And so at that time, he was the father of 11 children. I believe that number has jumped up to 14 as of 2026, but correct me if I'm wrong, internet. So low birth rates are an issue. We're starting to get some interest from IPO bros and what you might call the tech elite or tech oligarchs, at least in this country. But we're also starting to see some really interesting kind of solutions to these hyper declining birth rates in places like Taiwan and South Korea.
Can I ask a question? Because you're right. There's been a sort of almost evangelical conservative push towards family creation and family values amongst a lot of these tech wealthy billionaires and Elon Musk and Mark Andreessen and the rest of them. Why are they so driven by this? Why do they think it's such an issue? What's their particular position?
Okay, so I'm going to try to make this sound not eugenicsy, but there is this pro-natalists movement.
I'm excited to see this happen.
So there is this movement called the pro-natalists movement. There are some leading influencers in this space. There's a couple named Malcolm and Simone Collins who are among the kind of pro-natalist influencers and activists. And they believe that we need to repopulate the planet and that it is a matter of national security, that our civilization, our society as we know it is in danger.
So this is connected somewhat to the idea that I know particularly Andreessen holds, which is that sort of American-style capitalism is the pinnacle of civilization and is under threat. And one of the ways to prevent that threat is to increase the number of people in it.
Exactly. And so there's a little bit of that. There was a great quote in the Financial Times, actually, that said they may talk about saving humankind, and they here is referencing kind of the tech elite, the Elon Musks of the world. They may talk about saving humankind, but their genetic largesse is down to a mix of narcissism, altruism, and dreams of immortality. So this movement, the pro-natalist movement, is aligned in some aims and outcomes to the movement around effective altruism. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about that?
So effective altruism was a movement that began, I believe, in university campuses around the US, but was effectively this idea that the existential problems of the far future and the well-being of future generations were more important than the harm that might be done today to people. So the idea being, and I may be conflating two things slightly actually, because effective altruism has a philosophy in it called long-termism, which is the idea that the long-term payoff of present suffering is worth it, and actually that we have a duty of care for people who are as yet unborn. So it's worth digging up all the minerals and exploiting all the earth and stuff just to ensure that we survive long into the future. And effective altruism is the idea that you are doing your best for other people by making as much money as possible. Essentially, it's a short version of it, like by building big companies and making tech products and stuff is a form of altruism which is much more effective than, say, philanthropy or charity. But
it also, to my understanding, kind of quantifies the process of where your good goes. There are things that have higher value than others, and that can be backed by data and facts effectively.
Yeah, there's sort of data-drivenness to it. There's a sense of what some people would call rationality rather than particularly being attached to particular causes.
Yeah. So to dive a little bit more deeply into pronatalism, because I found it to be a little bit yucky for to not have a better term. And they swear it's not linked to white supremacist ideals, you guys.
I think the fact that you have to defend that is sort of...
Well, they said it. Okay, so the reason I even had to say that was because, so in one of these interviews that Malcolm and Simone Collins gave, Simone, the wife, said, people think that this is linked to white supremacy, but it's really not. We're really here because we believe that this is the only way to ensure that humanity has, a fighting chance, basically. But essentially, one of the articles that I was reading has said that due to its appeal to diverse political and ideological strands, pronatalism has found fans among a loose confederation of religious conservatives, libertarian techies, and blogger bros. Supporters broadly share the aim of incentivizing parenthood from an economic and political standpoint. However, they do make some kind of a distinction between what these kind of like tech elite are looking out for, saying that their rationale and objectives are a little bit different, that there is an emerging class of right-wing progressives who view technology as the natural solution to and means of childbearing itself. And they tend to promote, and this is a quote, and I unfortunately am quoting Emma Walters from the Helen DeVos Center for Life, Religion, and Family, which is, I will say, a conservative group at the Heritage Foundation. She believes that these entrepreneurs tend to promote in practice, if not speech, a selective pronatalism, more babies of a certain kind.
So that's a pretty right-wing conservative say this is pretty right-wing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And they're saying Elon Musk in this Bloomberg article is also among a growing number of Silicon Valley investors in fertility technology and research who are looking for a way to reverse reproductive aging, overcome infertility, and optimize child selection. So doesn't sound great. We're starting to feel like we're in a little bit of a sci-fi thing. And there's a conference that happens called NatalCon. NatalCon. It's all about
NatalCon.
NatalCon. Yeah.
It's not a word that sounds right.
Yeah, it's natalism conference. So it's these folks who are pro-natalist. They congregate and convene, descend upon Austin, Texas. And the first conference, just a little while back in 2024, had a scathing review from a political writer.
We love a scathing review right here on Futur-ish. What was it?
Basically, they were saying, like, again, everything has happened before and nothing is new, right? So they said the new right, a conglomeration of people on the populist wing of the conservative movement who believe we need seismic changes to the way we live now and who often see the past as the best model for the future they'd like to build. Now, these pronatalists believe they've invented something new, that they're not harkening back to or alluding back to these old ideals, these traditionalist ideals. And oftentimes they try to distinguish themselves from more religious groups who are having children procreating in the name of, what is it, children are God's divine blessing or something like that.
Yeah, or even just because it's a dogmatic interpretation of scripture.
So this, of course, goes along some of these debates around pro-life versus pro-choice, the right to abortion, women's health, all of that. Their ideology, such as it exists, is far from cohesive, and factions of the new right are frequently in disagreement. But this weekend at this NatalCon, these roughly aligned groups from the libertarian adjacent tech types to the Heritage Foundation staffers, along with some who likely have no connection with traditionally conservative or far-right causes at all, have found a unifying cause in natalism. So there's this guy. His name is Kevin Dolan. He's a 37-year-old father of 6 from Virginia. And the case that he is making is capitalism and consumer-driven society is hedonistic, and it requires that its members be slavishly devoted to their office jobs, often at the expense of starting a family. So they are not tapping into the capitalist kind of notion. So you can see there's a little bit of a divide even within the pro-natalist movement.
I bet that divide is a gender divide.
100%. And actually 90% of the participants at this conference were men. This part sucks. The seemingly novel arguments for having children fade and give way to a different set of concerns. Throughout the day, speakers and participants hint at the other aspects of modern life that worried them about future generations in the US and other parts of the West. Divorce, gender integration, quote unquote wokeness, and declining genetic quality. What are we alluding to? What are they trying to say here?
I don't think they're talking about corn. I just don't think they're talking about, disease-resistant crops.
Yeah. I don't think we're talking about populations exploding for all.
Someone must have done a cheat deck on how to dress up eugenics.
So that part feels a little eugenicsy. And of course, it would be a movement set in the United States. But I don't want to make this entire episode about that because this problem of lower birth rates is a global epidemic. And there are other countries in the world who are not addressing this with the same religious, right-wing, conservative ideals. And they're not making it just purely kind of a theoretical, ideological problem. So what I found to be really interesting, and actually this had come up as a signal in some of our research in Foresight and our day jobs, the question we had asked the attendees to think through was whether or not they thought this phenomenon of being paid to have babies, like state-commissioned baby bonuses, was going to come true, whether that was a real thing. And I remember most people thought it was absolutely ridiculous and that it wasn't going to come true. But the fact of the matter is that this is happening in lots of different countries all over the world in various ways. So probably the least effective is in the United States. There's what the current administration is calling baby bonuses or baby subsidies. And this is eligible to American children born between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028. So the benefit is a one-time $1,000 deposit from the federal government. And it's called a Trump account. And it is essentially something that parents, guardians, family members can contribute up to $5,000 a year. whatever. But it's a one-time deposit, right? So $1,000 for one child, one time, not really doing much to move the needle to say, hey, have a baby. We're going to make it easier on you. Now,
But that could be if saved or invested, could be enough to send someone to college.
$1,000. $1,000. I can't. My grocery bill for the month is $1,000, sir.
This is the most perfect reaction I've ever seen. It's like $1,000.
What socialist state do you live in, my friend?
It's worth it just to see your reaction, actually, to that. That was brilliant.
But I'll say this, like, as an incentive for parents to have children, to sustain the lives of their children, that does not feel like an effective means to do that. So there are other countries around the world who I think are trying to address this in more effective ways. There's Taiwan, who, as of 2026, they're giving a monthly credit per child. So the last time I checked, it was about $930 a month per child provided by the government. And that is, again, to incentivize people to have children. That to me feels a little bit more realistic. It's saying we will give you this monthly stipend to support the cost of raising a child, because they recognize that there is decline in birth rates. And what that ultimately means is, as the population continues to age, there are fewer people in the workforce to burden the cost of sustaining that cohort of society. There's also fewer people in armed forces to be able to defend against global threats. There is one little part of Taiwan, our world's semiconductor capital, called Hsinchu City, and they seem to have overcome the 0.89 children birth rate. They're having a surplus. Families are having between 2 and 3 children per family unit.
Congrats, Hsinchu.
Now, and they're so excited, actually, these tech companies, that the Hsinchu district has bragged that its employees were behind 1.8% of newborns that year across Taiwan.
Busy employees.
Yes. So this is their Silicon Valley, right? And they also say the US cities like San Francisco have these declining birth rates because the cost of living and housing is so high. So the National Bureau of Economic Research did a 2012 study, and the article was called "The Impact of the Real Estate Market on Fertility." And what they found was that a 10% increase in home prices leads to a 1% decrease in births among non-homeowners in an average metropolitan area, which is significant, right? Because if you look at the cost of rent and even mortgages in the last 10 to 15 years, that has shot up probably more than 10%, honestly.
Yeah,
if
definitely.
I think about, right? So not great. But the one thing I will say about a place like Hsinchu is the family model, or the family unit, has become quite traditionalist. So there's one partner that stays home and raises the children, and one partner who works very long hours and is, just hyper focused on their career to be able to provide for the 2 to 3 children. But there are other social infrastructures in place to support the kind of rearing of these children, right? There's daycares, there's schools. Some of these companies have built kindergartens on campus so that you can kind of drop off your children and go to work. So there are kind of social infrastructures in place. Now, in South Korea, where, if we remember, they have the lowest births per woman at 0.74, and their rate has been declining steadily for the last 20 years, to the point where their population is projected to shrink by a third by 2072, which is within our lifetime, I would say.
Yeah, I'm only 25 now. I would have thought so.
What year were you born in, Tobias? Does it have a 19 in front of it?
Listen, I would have done very well being either born in like the 2010s or in the 1810s. And anything in between has been a waste of time.
I could see you in the 1810s, really. I really could. Anyway, continue. So the government of South Korea is understandably spending hundreds of billions of dollars on this program. And I was listening to this podcast called the Big Take Asia podcast. It's put out by Bloomberg. And there was an episode from October of 2025 that said there is a construction company called Boo Young, and they've launched a birth rate support program where each employee will receive 100 million won. So that is equivalent to $72,000 for the birth of a child.
Wow, that's huge.
No strings attached.
That is enough to raise a child.
It is very much enough to raise a child, and it's tax-free. And you could take the money and run, basically. So there's no obligation to come back to the company, none of that. Now, none of the employees have left. And people are actually taking advantage of this incentive. So other businesses in South Korea are also following this model. So game developer Krafton has started paying $43,000 for birth and another $29,000 for the first 8 years of a child's life. Aircraft manufacturer Korea Aerospace Industries offers $7,000 for the first and second child and $22,000 for the third. Why am I living in this country?
Is this what it took for you to answer that question?
Yes, truly.
Yeah, up till now everything's been great, but you saw these statistics, you're like, what am I doing?
I think what's interesting is we're starting to value metrics like population growth and cost of living in these new ways. And we're starting to see private corporations take on the burden of that, where typically you would have had government-funded policies to help drive or regulate some of these issues, even though it does impact society at large and could potentially be categorized as something that like the government should be regulating in some way. There's some very real implications and risks to countries not improving their birth rates. Countries like Taiwan and South Korea are having to deal with some pretty massive consequences. There's the burden of an aging population. Countries like Japan are having to deal with this as well. I think the last figure I read was in this last year, they lost 900,000 people in their population, which is huge for a country like Japan. And there are fewer folks entering the workforce. There are fewer folks entering the military. Some of these companies are throwing their money at it and it's working in certain ways, but how sustainable is that in the long run, right? I don't know if a company like Booyoung can continue to throw $72,000 to every employee that chooses to have a child.
For how long? You're going to do it for 18 years until you can employ those kids?
For how long? And then there's this gap that's also starting to come up in this right-wing, highly conservative, mildly eugenics-driven movement to breed a certain population of people and repopulate the planet. What is this telling us about the state of the world? And if we zoom out a little bit and we look at the state of geopolitics, and Taiwan is pretty vulnerable. The US is undergoing a civil war and probably making enemies of most of the world at this time. South Korea are at war with North Korea at all times, basically. So it's not just about workforce or an aging population. There's these national security things that are at play as well. And then there's just racism. So
one of the things, for instance, is the pension bomb. So it's the point where a lot of economists think that once there's 2 workers for every pensioner, the economy basically collapses. It's just unsustainable. Yep. Many countries are heading towards that at the moment.
I think my solution is just make all the old people the babysitters. There you go.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something you can try. Yeah, for sure. Mixed results.
Mixed results for sure.
I mean, there's a little bit of an experiment going on at the moment. There's an unusual blip in people who were born in 1991 to 1992. And if you look at population charts, they're actually quite a blip. So normally it's quite a gentle curve of, towards younger people. And obviously that curve is starting to flatten more and more as less people are born. But actually that age group, which is currently sort of 34, 35, they actually stick out. And so there's been quite a few economists following it, because basically what has to happen is all of the...
Yes, I have read about this.
All of the social institutions have to flex to accommodate them. So they all have to grow. There has to be more school places, more hospital beds, blah, blah, blah. But then the people coming up under them are back to normal. So all of them have to snap back, which is a real concern for economists, because they're going to think that as this age group just grows up through society, they're going to leave in their wakes for the people younger than them catastrophe, because all the schools will have had to have got bigger for that group, and then the next group won't have that many people, so they'll have to snap back. And
yikes.
So some are looking at it as an experiment in what happens as the population starts to decline over a much shorter scale, because this is such a massive difference to the generation preceding and afterwards.
I think the shutting down of schools and stuff is also not great. We're seeing, institutions here in the United States starting to shut down, and one of the articles I read about the Taiwanese birth rate decline is that elementary schools and high schools and things like that, daycare centers, are having to shut down. So there's impacts like that as well, right, to the education system that we also have to think about.
Interesting to see if this idea of paying to have children works. All the projections say that the global population flatlines around 2100 anyway. So it's
2100,
it's
but we still have another 80 years to get there.
Yeah.
By 2050, it's going to be 9.5 billion.
Yeah, and then it'll start to flatline. Yeah.
Take me out. I'm done.
I've always found the conversations about population really difficult, because obviously there has been this thing in sustainability around there's just too many people, there's too many mouths to feed, which again has the hint of eugenics to it. And it necessarily demands you to make massive generalizing, sweeping statements about people because you're talking about whole populations.
Yeah.
I always find it very strange, a bit uncomfortable. That's what I'm
They
saying.
are uncomfortable because you're talking about people's lives.
Yeah.
But we're also talking
exactly.
about the economic impact, right? And
Yeah.
the standard of our lives at that point. So of course they're uncomfortable, but I think they need to be had, especially when we talk about futures. Listen, we got to talk about the serious stuff sometimes, you know? It can't all just be fun and games.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Well, have fun editing this.
Thank you. Toodles.
This freaking doozy. Bye.